Great. Welcome, everyone. My name is Father Charles Trujols. I'm the director of the Catholic Information Center, and I'm so pleased to see all of you after the summer coming back to the CIC, and I want to welcome also all of you present at the CIC through the live stream. The Catholic Information Center is committed to make the Catholic Church, to make Jesus present in the hearts and minds of so many people who work and live in downtown Washington, D.C., and who work and live around the country through the, through the live stream. And we offer a variety of programs, speakers, and many different events to make this possible. We have daily Mass. Our motto is the closest tabernacle to the White House, so behind this screen we have the Blessed Sacrament. And I'm here every day, as a priest, hearing confessions, giving spiritual direction. And I wanted to tell you that the CIC is, I would say, we are in the heart of our nation's capital, making the Catholic faith really alive. And today we are going to talk about something very important, which is beauty. Beauty, as you may know, is transcendental. It's something that a property of every being and finds perfection in God. And every time that we grow in beauty or we see beauty, we experience beauty, we can experience the presence of God in different ways. And I would like to, it's my pleasure to introduce to you Kathleen Carr. She's the president of the Catholic Art Institute. And she's an award-winning, classical trained painter, illustrator, and a great artist. And I would like to all of you to welcome Kathleen Carr.
Thank you very much, Father Charles, and thank you for agreeing to partner on this wonderful event. We're delighted to be joined with the Catholic Information Center for this amazing partnership. This is the first of many to come. We felt the foundation of the philosophy of beauty was an important way to begin this. So thanks also goes to Gerard and Angelica for their help making this a reality. I wanted to just say a quick word about other events coming up with the Catholic Art Institute, and one is our major conference that's happening thanks to the partnership and invitation of James McInerny, who joins us this evening. So at the end of this month, on September 27th and 28th, we'll be hosting our 5th annual conference at Catholic University. I hope you'll be able to join us. We will have 6 speakers, including Dr. Chloe Redaway, who is from the National Gallery in London. James McInerny will be offering a talk, Roberta Amundsen, who is an author and philanthropist, Craig Hamilton, award-winning traditional architect, and Dr. Barbara Nicolosi will be talking about the power of cinema. And for the liturgy, it's very Reverend Father Joshua Caswell. There'll be a beautiful mass with polyphonic music at the Dominican House of Studies. So I just wanted to hope you can join us and invite you. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our honored guest this evening. Thank you very much for joining us. Anxious to hear this profound talk you'll be sharing. Dr. McInerny is an associate professor and chair of the philosophy department at Christendom College in Fort Royal, Virginia. He is also a novelist and dramatist. Pardon me. As a scholar, Daniel is foremost interested in retrieving an Aristotelian understanding of mimetic art, long out of favor among philosophers. At Christendom College, Daniel teaches courses on the philosophy of art and beauty, the philosophy of technology, the philosophy of culture and ethics and imagination. He received his BA in English from the University of Notre Dame and his PhD in philosophy from the Catholic University of America. He has taught and worked at various universities in the United States, including a stint as an associate director of the Notre Dame Center for Ethics and Culture, now called the De Nicola Center for Ethics and Culture at the University of Notre Dame. He has taught at Christendom College since the fall of 2019. On June 3rd, 2024, Word on Fire academic published his monograph, Beauty and Imitation, a philosophical reflection on the arts. In March 2023, Chrism Press published his novel, The Good Death of Kate Montclair. Daniel is also the author of the play The Actor, about the subversive wartime theatrical activities of the young Karol Wojtyła, the man who would become Pope St. John Paul II, which will premiere at Christendom College in November 2024. Daniel also writes a Substack newsletter, The Comic Muse, where he shares philosophical and sometimes humorous reflections on the arts and culture. A native of South Bend, Indiana, Daniel is the youngest child of the late Ralph McInerny, revered philosopher at the University of Notre Dame for over 50 years, and best known by many as the author of the beloved Father Dowling series of mystery novels. Daniel and his wife, Amy, have 3 grown children and 1 preternaturally adorable grandchild, and live in the beautiful Shenandoah Valley of Virginia. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage Dr. McInerny. Thank you.
I'm going to have this. Kathleen, for that generous introduction. Thank you, Father. So here under the auspices of the Catholic Art Institute and the CIC. Thank you all for coming out tonight. Hey, I know why you're here. And it's not about me, and it's not about the book. You are here because you are desperately seeking your beloved. Now, I don't just mean that the CIC is a great place to meet your future soulmate. I'm sure it is. But I'm talking about a different kind of beloved. I'm talking about the beloved that you seek when perhaps a few blocks from here down to the
Oh.
There we go.
Sounds. Let's hear there.
Thank you.
Testing.
There we go.
All right.
Hear me now. Okay. So we're talking about a different sort of beloved. The beloved that you sometimes seek when you go, say, a few blocks from here down to the National Gallery. Or the beloved that you seek when you buy a ticket to a concert. Seek when you put on those noise-canceling earphones and put on your favorite playlist, or snuggle with a novel, or hunker down in the dark with family or friends to watch Netflix or a movie. You are so desperate to find this beloved that you will even come to a philosophy lecture, which is probably the dictionary definition of desperation. It didn't take much to lure you in. All we had to do was give your beloved title, beauty. All we had to do in the description was name the thing most often associated with beauty, art. And we had you here in very massive numbers, including those watching on the live stream. Yes, your beloved is, and in particular, the arts. What beauty is already starting to emerge. Beauty is something that attracts us to itself. In fact, in ancient Greek, the word for beauty is tak, and it comes from this Greek root, this infinitive, kalein, which means to call, or also to summon. When you are summoned by something, there's a demand, a necessity. You have to come. Right? So beauty is that call. It is that summons that compels you. And don't language about our favorite works of art. I was enthralled by it. I was captivated by it. Those are metaphors of enslavement. It's interesting, right? We have to go to beauty, right? Beauty is a love story. Beauty is a love story. And what we desire out of that love is a kind of consummation. So this is my thumbnail sketch of the love story of beauty that I want to show very briefly tonight. Are summoned to become one with, conformed to presence. Yes, I'm using that phrase deliberately. The real aspect of the human quest for genuine fulfillment. Okay.
I will not bother you.
That's okay.
All right. Would you mind?
Nope.
Okay, thank you.
Good. So beauty is an experience where you are summoned to become one with the real presence of some aspect of the human quest for genuine fulfillment. To become one with reality is just another way of talking about truth. That is why when we enjoy our favorite works of art, we feel in a way that we have come home, that we have found something of our true selves, because we are literally living in the truth. It's as though we're inside the truth. So a love story typically has various episodes. And I want to, again, very briefly tonight, walk you through some of the key episodes in the love story that is our encounter with beauty. Everything I say tonight is going to be controversial to somebody. Everything I say tonight needs to be bubble wrapped in qualifications, but we don't have time for any of that. Right? You've heard of roller skating through the Uffizi. This is going to be shot out of a cannon through the Uffizi. But I'm going to lay it all out and then we can talk about it. Okay, so let's begin with the meet cute. In other words, how are we attracted to the beautiful in the first place? Why are we attracted to the beautiful in the first place? Let's begin with the fact that we are embodied spirits. And we encounter reality in two main ways. One way through our senses, our 5 external senses, but also our internal senses. You may not think of the fact that our memory and our imagination are actually senses. We often think those are intellectual activities, but they're senses. We love to encounter the world, the particularity of the world, through our senses. Okay. But we also encounter reality with our intellect, with our mind. And our mind takes us into a world of abstractions, of concepts. Now, each one has its strength, each one has its weakness. Sensation takes us to that wonderfully tasty particular, right? Or that particular thing that we just love to look at and to sense in some way, to listen to smell, to touch. Unfortunately, by sensation alone, we can't understand reality. We don't grasp its meaning. On the other hand, with our intellect, yes, we can understand concepts. It's wonderful, it's beautiful, but in doing so, you kind of are taken away from the world of the particular. Right? This is why the comic image of the philosopher comes from the first philosopher in the West that we know of, Thales, who fell into a well looking up at the stars, right? So lost in a world of abstractions, he doesn't even know where he is in the world of particulars, and he falls down the well. Here's what art does for us. Art gives us our desire for the sensible particular, and it gives us the desire for meaning, all put together in one intoxicating experience. Or as I like to tell my students, in one perfect sandwich. So you get the sensible and the intelligible or the meaningful all in one bite. And we as human beings are made for that. We cannot get enough of that. We even will repeat the same experience of the beautiful over and over and over and over again. So, hey guys, do you want to watch the BBC version of Pride and Prejudice again? We've seen it 25 times. We can recite all the lines. Cue it up, right? We want to see it again. We can't get enough. It's connatural to us as human beings to be summoned by art. If I came on with the microphone tonight and I said the title of my talk was Kant's Third Transcendental Critique, you'd probably want to call the police, right? Because you know you would be in that heaven of abstraction. And for us human beings, it's good, it's beautiful, we're made for it, but it's also very exhausting, right? So when I say I'm going to talk about beauty and I'm going to talk about art, there's something inside us that just goes, yes, right? Okay. Our attraction to art. So we've met, but now we want to soak up the real presence of the beloved. And here I want to really focus in on that phrase, real presence. What I have up there on the slide is, for my money, a pretty good definition of art itself. In a work of art, the forms, say, the characteristics of things become truly present before us, but in a different medium. That is part of the intoxicating experience for us. So we might watch the late night TV show, and we see the celebrity doing voice impressions, right? The British actor Benedict Cumberbatch, pretty darn good at voice impressions. He does a mean impression of his fellow actor, Alan Rickman. So we will watch and we'll hear Alan Rickman coming out of Benedict Cumberbatch's mouth, and we just love that. Why don't we just go and search on YouTube and watch videos of Alan Rickman? Why don't we watch Alan Rickman's movies? We do that too, but not just to luxuriate in his voice, but when it comes out of another person's mouth, when it comes out of a different medium, it's like, ow, that's cool. We're seeing the real presence, at least of the sensible form of Alan Rickman's voice, in a fresh way, in a new way. And even there, in watching the late night program, we're contemplating. We're soaking up that reality. And it can be a beautiful experience. When I say that art brings the forms or characteristics of things into a different medium, I mean both sensible forms or characteristics that we can see, hear, typically, so color, sound, but it also brings intelligible or meaningful forms. This is part of that sandwich I was talking about. Art is going to bring us meaning as well. Let's take a look at an example. Here's a painting some of you may know. This is Graham Sutherland's 1954 portrait of Winston Churchill. If you're a fan of Netflix's The Crown, they did a whole episode on this painting. I think it was in season 1. Parliament commissioned Graham Sutherland to paint this portrait of Churchill as sort of a lifetime achievement award. And you can go on YouTube and see a grainy black and white video of it being presented to Churchill in Parliament, them taking sort of the black cover off, and he hated it. He hated it. Graham Sutherland painted him as he saw him, a man who had been through the ringer of the first part of the 20th century and had taken his lumps, given some in return, but he was an elderly man. He was somewhat haggard. He, let's say he didn't hit the gym 3 days a week. He was tired. And Graham Sutherland captured that. Now, art brings the forms or characteristics of things in their real presence into a new medium. So the outrageous thing I want to suggest to you right now is Winston Churchill is in the room with us now. I'm not being mystical, I'm not being silly, and I'm not being metaphorical. Yes, he's not here in all his living three-dimensionality. But in terms of his sensible forms, you know, his shape, the shape of his head, the shape of his nose, the look of his expression, it's here in its real presence in a new medium. Sensible forms of Churchill are present, but also I would say intelligible or meaningful forms. The character of Churchill is also here with us now, available for us to contemplate. We do have to think about it. We have to think, okay, what does Sutherland want to tell me about Churchill's character in this portrait? Maybe I captured it in my earlier remarks. Actually, Sutherland himself thought that he was capturing something of the heroism of Churchill, right? But you get a moral dimension to Churchill coming through as well as the sensible dimension. It's a real presence. The understanding of art that I am advocating and arguing for very briefly tonight comes from Aristotle. It was developed by St. Thomas Aquinas. It is a mimetic understanding of art. Art is mimesis. We often enough in English translate that as imitation. I prefer the word representation, right, with sort of a hyphen. It's presencing again in a new medium. Right? Churchill here again with us, but this time in 2 dimensions and in oil paints. So we're learning about the real presence. Now, whenever we start talking about mimetic art, people begin to worry. If you espouse a mimetic understanding of art, does that mean that you take art to be copying? Because if you're trying to bring the real presence of something, say, onto a canvas or into a novel, aren't you trying to render it as absolutely faithfully as you possibly can? Doesn't that mean that you have to be committed to a kind of photorealism of whatever object it is you're trying to depict? I would say no. I would say no. Because we need to make a key distinction between an image, a picture, and a likeness. We don't want to confuse those two. Right? 2 things can be very much alike and darn near identical without being images or pictures of one another. So my wife and I own 2 red Honda CR-Vs. If you don't look at the license plates, they're absolutely identical. But neither one is a picture of one another, of the other. Same thing with the eggs in the egg carton. They sure look alike. They're similar, but none of them is an image, a picture of the other. So mimesis, representation, or what I also like to call picturing, is not copying. It's not just about capturing a likeness. However, here's a key qualification I do have to throw in. There does have to be enough of a likeness for us to make an identification with the object being pictured. So if I just had up on the screen sort of a purely black canvas with red slashes through it, and I said, this is a portrait of Winston Churchill, you'd all think I was joking or I was in the grip of some theory of modern art. Because there's no way for you to make the identification. There's nothing there. So there has to be just enough for our minds to say, yes, that's Churchill. And sometimes painters, they try to help us make that identification only by what they put in the title card underneath the painting. And that's enough, right? Jackson Pollock in the 1950s, the action painter, right? Like to really, in a dynamic way, throw paint on the canvas. One of his canvases is called Autumn Rhythm Number 30. Now, if that title wasn't underneath it, we'd be utterly at a loss to connect that painting with autumn. There's not anything there to help us make the identification. But the title card, it enlivens the experience a bit and think, okay, maybe he's trying to capture a mood. He's trying to capture the autumn rhythm of the wind, of the leaves, of how he feels, right? We could talk about the value of that. It's hanging on to the mimetic tradition by a fingernail, but it's interesting. Okay, so mimetic art, not copying. There's a lot of room then for stylistic differences. Okay, next step in our love story. We've met cute, we've come into each other's real presence, and now we're starting a story together. Probably the most controversial thing I say in my book is that every work of mimetic art is narrative in nature. And I get this from Aristotle, who in his Poetics says, he's talking about tragedy, he's talking about theater, but he says tragedy imitates human beings in action, human beings doing things. And for Aristotle, for a human being to do something, that human being is in pursuit of the good. That human being is in pursuit of happiness. That human being is in pursuit of fulfillment. That human being is living a story. So if we're going to imitate human beings in action, then art itself is going to be narrative. It's going to be a story. I'm not just talking about arts that are literally storytelling arts, novels, short stories, plays. I'm talking more controversially about art such as, perhaps most controversially, music, especially music without lyrics, music without any obvious narrative context. It's not in a musical, it's Mozart's 40th. What do we do with it? I suggest we think of it narratively, right? And I would say the same thing about sculpture, dance. All the arts are narrative. They're trying to capture the real presence of some aspect of the human story, right? They're trying to persuade us of the artist's understanding of the meaning of the human experience and of our human quest to make sense out of our lives. I would say even a painting such as this, Caspar David Friedrich's 1824 The Polar Sea, I would say even this is narrative. Even this is talking about the human story. Why do I say that? Well, briefly, it is showing us a portion of our planet that is not habitable by human beings. This is the outer rim, and perhaps, at least in 1824, well beyond the outer rim of where human beings can make their home. This is a place where adventurers might go, but where the common person cannot dare to go. Right? It's still telling us something about the human habitat. I would say the same thing for a Cézanne still life. the bowl of fruit, the bottle of wine on the table is still talking about our life. Even though there's no human being in the frame, it's only human beings who put fruit in bowls and make wine and arrange their tables in beautiful ways. I'm not saying that's the only thing Cézanne was concerned with. He was concerned with compositional form, shape, color. But one thing we can contemplate is what the work is telling us about our human quest for happiness. Okay. Now, there is no story without conflict. There is no romantic story where there isn't a moment where all seems lost, where it seems that Elizabeth Bennet and Mr. Darcy, it's just not going to happen. Right? He heard about Lydia and he was gone and it's all over. All seems lost. Right? Well, there is such a moment in our story as well. We live in a culture where our love story with beauty is being greatly challenged, right, by a conception of art that is not mimetic and that I would call a vision of art governed by an ideal of what the philosopher Charles Taylor calls expressive authenticity. So here, the artist is not trying to capture the real presence, the meaning of the human quest for the genuine good. The artist is not trying to capture the demand of what that good makes upon us. Rather, the artist is expressing his or her own individual sense of what gives their life meaning. Right? Authenticity. Right? If you want to get a good flavor of what this ideal of expressive authenticity is, I show this to my students. Take a look at Steve Jobs' 2005 commencement address at Stanford University. He gives voice to the ideal of authenticity, God bless him, better than anyone I've ever heard, and he does it passionately, right? We have to reject dogma, he says. We have to find our own good in the world, right? Now, I'm not here tonight to dismiss all modern art, far from it. But, I should say, a lot of the art that we enjoy is made by artists governed by the ideal of expressive authenticity. It's just that it so happens that what they think is authentic overlaps with our own understanding of the good, and we can enjoy their story. We know that if we talk to the author, the screenwriter, the director about their understanding of human life, we'd have a lot to disagree with. But this particular story they told, this particular painting, this particular piece of music, hey, I can at least connect with your vision to that degree. But there are plenty of artists who will more self-consciously, more deliberately reject the understanding of the good and that I've been talking about, and reject the mimetic tradition quite deliberately. Right? And they present a challenge to this understanding of art. So we have to grapple with this conflict. The best way to do it is to understand a little bit more completely the nature of our beloved. I'm sure a lot of you know that St. Thomas identifies 3 characteristics of the beautiful. These characteristics, to go back to what Father was saying in his introduction, these 3 characteristics of beauty belong to all reality wherever we may find it. So they don't just have to do with artworks. They're woven into the very fabric of reality. So wherever you find reality, you're going to find some kind of beauty. That's a mystical thought. So Neil Sedaka, who had a great hit in the 1970s, he was right. Everything is beautiful in its own way, right? Don't start singing, you'll throw me off, right? So here are the 3 characteristics that we find wherever we find the beautiful. Integritas, consonantia, and claritas. I'm going to translate those as integrity, wholeness, completeness, oneness, proportion, could also say harmony, radiance. I could use splendor, brilliance. These terms are what we philosophers like to call analogous. That is, again, they show up wherever reality is found, they show up wherever beauty is found in a work of art, but not in the same way. So what wholeness is for a symphony is going to be very different than what wholeness is for a poem, but you're going to find wholeness in each, right? So let's do a few very, very, very quick exercises, trying to identify these characteristics in works of art. Gerard, can you put up the Sistine Chapel for us? Now, you might think that my best move here would be to show you a work of art such as this, Michelangelo's Last Judgment in the Sistine Chapel. I'm sure many of you have seen it live. It's obviously beautiful. It's obviously worth our time and trouble, but it's too big, it's too complex, too many moving parts. But even if we had hours to spend together, I would still suggest that we don't begin thinking about beauty with a work this complex. I think we should begin very small and even microscopically, believe it or not, with a single word. So if we could go back to the PowerPoint, Gerard, thank you. Shakespeare, Macbeth, Act 1, Scene 1. First witch, first lines of the play. When shall we three meet again? In thunder, lightning, or in rain? Second witch, when the hurly-burly's done. When the battle's lost and won. Hurly-burly, beautiful word. I always thought that Shakespeare made it up. But I was doing some etymological research and I found that it actually came into the English language about a generation or so before Shakespeare, and it was hurling and burling. Not so beautiful. Your tongue kind of gets stuck on the roof of your mouth a little bit, hurling and burling. Shakespeare was artist enough to say, no, I think I'm going to go with hurly-burly. Where's the wholeness? Where's the integrity? Well, we certainly have a single noun, so I'm already noting the wholeness there. Shakespeare, in his text, interestingly puts the hyphen between the two words, connecting them, forging the wholeness between the two words, okay? Harmony, proportion. Well, again, we get a kind of assonance in the middle of the word, right, with the repetition of the UR, and then we have the repetition of the LY. So we have literal harmony here and here. That's why it's so fun to say. That's why you can swirl the word around in your mouth like a swallow of Cabernet Sauvignon. It's just beautiful. Hurly-burly, hurly-burly. Go home saying it to yourself. Clarity, radiance, brilliance. It's because it's kind of onomatopoetic, isn't it? Hurly-burly. Even if you know nothing about Shakespeare, nothing about Macbeth, and someone just comes up to you and says hurly-burly, you know that there's kind of a hiccup at least. There's a disruption. There's an unruliness in the very sound of the word. That's brilliant on Shakespeare's part. And that brilliance is shining through. Go back to my controversial part. Every work of art is narrative in some sense. I would even argue that there is a narrative in embryo even in this single word. And I'm not saying anything about Three Witches or Macbeth or anything. You don't need to go there. You just need to hear the word hurly-burly. You know something, you don't know what, has been upset. That's a story. It's a germ of a story. It's vague, it's inchoate, but there's a narrative of some kind peeking out even in this one word. Okay, let's see what time. time. Let's do one more example. Gerard, let's go to the film clip. We could look at lots of different examples of art, but I'm going to end with this one. We haven't talked about the cinema yet. One of my favorites. I want to show you a very brief scene, just about 2 minutes, from Sam Mendes' 2019 film, World War I drama, 1917. I won't spoil the ending for you. The setup couldn't be easier. A soldier, Lance Corporal Schofield, has to deliver a message to one of his superiors to stop an advancement of British troops because they're going into a trap. So he's got to deliver the message so that lives are saved. That's the story. He encounters obstacle after obstacle after obstacle after obstacle. We're going to see in this scene the biggest obstacle he encounters, which are his own colleagues, his own comrades, who don't really understand what he's up to. They're ready to advance, and they're getting in his way physically, right? Let's roll that. Thank you, Gerard. One of the ways we see wholeness in this scene, a scene is a whole by definition. What makes it a whole is that the camera position is in essentially one place. Now, I understand the camera's moving, right? If you see behind the scenes clips, you learn that the camera is actually on the back of a truck, right, ahead of him as he runs. But the camera fundamentally doesn't change locations. It moves within a single location. That helps us identify a certain wholeness to the scene. More importantly, there's a wholeness because there's a singleness of intention. He needs to get through the lines to his commander to deliver the message, right? There's a lot other ways we can identify integrity. I don't want to make this paint by numbers, but I'm going fast, just identifying some of the ways in which we can find these qualities. Proportion, we see in many ways. One way, Schofield running through the lines, his comrades running right at a 90-degree angle to him, right? So that he is rushing into them. In interviews I've seen with the actor, I never am sure I quite believe these stories, but he says, oh, none of that was planned. Those were extras coming out of the foxhole, and we accidentally ran into each other in the heat of the moment. Maybe. But the very act of them being at cross purposes in this very dramatic, even elegant scene creates a kind of very chaotic harmony, you might say, paradoxically. The brilliance, the radiance comes through, again, just the visual of him running across that great expanse that hits our senses in a very dramatic way. But more importantly, in terms of his moral character, this is his greatest act of fortitude in the story. That is most of all what is shining through and what we feel in our bones when the violins swell in that moment, right? So those are some of the ways we can identify integrity, proportion, and harmony in a little more complex work of art. Okay. So we end our story, but with the question, is it going to have a happy ending? And I want to suggest that comes down to us. Beauty is demanding. Beauty is a summons. Beauty is difficult in its own way. Like any beloved, it demands time, it demands attention, it demands concentration, even as it is thrilling and wonderful. That's hard to do in our day and age because we carry around our IV dopamine drips with us at all times. Those don't make great demands on us, but they are fracturing our attention so that when we turn to a real work of art, a great work of art, it's a strain for us. We need to fight against that, right? We need to learn how to make good distinctions between that which is truly beautiful, that which is only so-so, and that which is downright ugly and even pernicious. That's important for us. We need, if we're artists, to make great art. We need to make art that takes as its ideal the greatest works of art that have ever been made. Our culture needs that from us. And then finally, we need to support artists in our culture so that once more, this tradition of beauty, of bringing reality into our real presence for our contemplation, itself becomes dominant once again. Thank you very much for your attention. Glad to take your questions if you have some. I think the film is still playing. Happy to take your questions. Father, please. Yes. Yes.
But how can this be? I don't know. I've been to some museums in here in Washington D.C. I've been to one that I have encountered this kind of works of art that are everything but art, in my opinion.
Sure. There are plenty of artists today, especially in the so-called, I should repeat the question first. Father was asking whether or not there are artists today who deliberately set out to make the ugly. And my answer is that, yeah, I think there are certain artists, especially in the so-called high-end sectors of our culture, who really have no interest in the beautiful, would take what I presented today as archaic, naive, patriarchal, whatever, but something that we have gotten past. And what they are trying to do is not concern themselves with the beautiful, and they may not be deliberately trying to make the ugly, but it's an extreme form of that expressive authenticity that I was talking about. What they think is most authentic about human life is what is dirty and disgusting and painful. And so they will make art accordingly. I used to begin my course at Christendom on Art and Beauty with a collection of examples of the kind I think you're thinking of. And there were certain examples I couldn't even verbally describe, and I wasn't going to put an image up on the screen. I just couldn't. They were that bad. They were wicked pieces. I'll say more encouragingly, I don't think most of us who make and love art, most human beings, think along those lines. I think the default understanding of human beings of art is more or less what I presented this evening. Even if they don't, have an Aristotelian or Thomistic understanding of human happiness, they are still just naturally inclining to some sort of view like this. This is why we enjoy many works of art made by people who we don't have a lot in common with philosophically or theologically. Okay. I think you have to be in the grip of a theory to really set out with some deliberation to make works of art that you're calling ugly. Excellent, thank you. Please.
In my understanding, we've never really had a time something non-human was created art, and the hot button kind of topic today is AI. Its place
Good.
in
Yeah.
generating images.
Yeah.
And so I was just curious, in your kind of understanding kind of this foundation, can something non-human, if it has those three characteristics, can something non-human create art that way, or what are your thoughts?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. Yeah, it's one very pressing today. The question is a work made apparently by non-human hands, painting, a piece of music made by AI, a work of art in the first place, and can it be beautiful? Well, first of all, I would say AI is man-made. It's functioning apparently autonomously, but it is man-made. And what it is doing is it's just an agglomeration of things that human beings have made. So in that sense, I have no trouble calling it art in the broad sense, not, well, maybe in the sense I was using earlier, but certainly in the basic senses, it's something made by human beings. So sure, let's call an AI painting, let's call an AI piece of music art. And maybe it will have certain characteristics of the beautiful. I think the real question that I bet is on your mind and it's on mine is that really a human achievement in sort of the deep existential sense of human? Is that the way we are to exercise our rationality, our creativity in making the beautiful? There I would say no. I would say no. There can be functional uses for AI, but I don't see it as just another player in the game I've been describing here tonight. Thank you. Excellent. Yes.
I think it relates to narrative, and that a lot of AI art you might see sometimes involves hallucinations, that if a human did it, like painted a person with 3 hands, you might be trying to make some sort of narrative statement, but when an AI does it, you think the AI just doesn't understand reality.
Made a mistake. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I think that's a nice. I think you answered your point. It's not really narrative. It's an algorithm, and that's simply not narrative. Yes, sir.
You spent a little time talking about photography.
Yes, thanks. Yeah. I had a student at Christendom College, whom I will not name, who did a wonderful thesis on photography and began the thesis, at least our discussions, arguing that photography was not an art. And that baffled me because I had no problem then, I have no problem now. Of course, photography is an art. Not necessarily the photos we take that my family and I were taking earlier, you just want to get a quick snap of somebody. But when the artist is composing the scene, controlling the light, thinking about the meaning of the subject being pictured, then of course it seems to me it is an art. You can have a photographic portrait of somebody. Think of that famous photographic portrait of Abraham Lincoln, that classic one. That is every bit as moving as Graham Sutherland's portrait of Churchill. So short answer, yes. Yeah, thank you. Way in the back, go ahead.
How do you rectify the sensible ugliness of, I guess, the perfect example is the fiction, the rash?
Yeah.
It's part of the human quest for happiness is ugly, and it's a
Yeah. Wonderful question. I'm not sure I can even paraphrase it with justice, so correct me if I don't quite get it. The question is, how do we reconcile this discussion of beauty with the fact that some of the highest realities in our Christian experience, crucifixion, most of all, are not beautiful? Is that a fair rendering of the question? Okay. We're going beyond my pay grade a little, but here's what I would venture. I think when we get to the most important realities of human existence, of which God wants to bring us into the real presence of, he disguises them to our senses. So you may be thinking of Isaiah 53. There was no beauty in him for us to look at, right? Christ on the cross, Christ carrying the cross, not beautiful to our senses. So we don't get that sensible delight that I've been talking about. That's not there. But it is a scene, it's a reality saturated with the highest meaning. So I think here we're getting into a mystical region where God he wants us to mortify, in a way, our sensible delight in order to concentrate on the meaning of the spiritual delight. That's what I would venture. Same thing in the Eucharist. I mean, the real presence par excellence. Not much to look at. The monstrance is brilliant to our senses, but the host rather plain, right? Again, I think God, beauty is summoning us. God, beauty with a capital B, is summoning us to himself, and he doesn't want to get us distracted by the sensible world. That's a philosopher trying to do theology. Go ahead. Excellent.
And I'm very interested to hear what you think the potential or the conflict might be between classical and approach.
Depends which phenomenologist you're talking to. I didn't mention him here tonight, but arguably, at least after Aristotle and St. Thomas, the greatest influence on these remarks tonight was a phenomenologist. And that is my revered teacher from the Catholic University of America, Monsignor Robert Sokolowski. It was Monsignor Sokolowski who wrote a wonderful article I hope you'll read I read it with my students, called Picturing. He doesn't talk much about art in that article, but it was in reading that article that I realized that picturing really is the same thing as mimesis, or at least mimesis is a kind of picturing. And so his phenomenological approach to our lived experience of the phenomenon of picturing is hugely influential on me. So I'll at least say that. So it's not just Aristotle and St. Thomas talking, though I don't think what Monsignor Sokolowski has to say is in any way contradictory to them. I think they're wonderfully harmonious. It may be quite different from other phenomenologists. That school of philosophy is not just one thing, right? Thank you. Brandon.
Yeah, so I love the book.
Thank you.
I have a question about, again, on the scope of what counts as art.
Yeah.
On food, right? So say,
Yeah.
traditionally there's been I think an exclusion of something like the sense of smell.
Yeah.
Is fitting within the scope of what we might consider the beautiful.
Yeah.
But you look at something like Babette's Feast or molecular gastronomy.
Yep.
It seems like it fits your criteria. So I'm just curious to know.
Yeah, and you remind me of Leon Kass's wonderful book, if you don't know it, The Hungry Soul, on food and eating. Great, delightful book. I wouldn't place dining at its best and most beautiful among what I call the mimetic arts, because a fine meal, while beautiful, no question, is not a picturing. It's not trying to bring a different reality into our real presence in a different medium. It has nothing to do with that. It simply is taking the goods of the earth and crafting them in the most delectable way possible, the most visually delightful way possible. That is certainly beautiful. It's certainly an art. It's just not a mimetic art, and that's no sin, right? And I think there's more than one sort of art that human beings do that fits that mold. I would say architecture is the same way. At least the basic structure is not a picturing of something, but it is certainly art, and it is certainly beautiful. Yeah, thank you. Yes, please. Yes, go ahead.
So I'm working on something related to this, and it's the idea of people creating beautiful things and therefore inspiring human dignity through it. And there's a verse I'll read to you, Wisdom 13:5, It says, "For from the greatness and beauty of created things comes a corresponding perception of their creator."
Mhm.
And of course, that talks about God, but a priest has spoke to said that related also to people and
Mhm.
the things they create.
Mhm.
So I just want to see if you had any thoughts on like how beauty and maybe co-creating beauty can reflect human dignity in that work.
Wow, that's a big one. Okay, first I'll try to paraphrase it. Help me if I get it wrong. The question is, say it again.
Yeah. How can beauty show human dignity
Okay,
in that work of creating?
yeah, how can works of beauty show our human dignity? You don't want to bring God, you're mostly interested in that. You mentioned God as part of your remarks, but you don't want to talk about that so much. It's more human dignity. Okay, well, I would at least start by saying this. There is a chapter of my book that I think hits this, but I'll say here, when we make a work of mimetic art, remember, we're picturing the human story in some way, even if it's just a bowl of fruit on a table, right? And so we are, in a sense, picturing what is dignified about human beings. Sometimes we show human beings in their indignity in art. But if the artist is a master, he'll somehow communicate in the work that this is undignified, right? So that we can make an assessment about how human beings are being pictured in the work as being noble, as being dignified, right? So that when we watch Sophocles' Oedipus the King, right? We, certainly not a Christian story, but we see in those horrific events, especially if we go through the whole trilogy of plays about Oedipus, we see a real dignity, a decency, a man who has, like Job, has been subjected to the worst horrors, but he kind of takes it with a certain sort of humility. So art can show us that. It can, and in fact, the best art always shows us that, I think, what is best in human beings, or showing us human beings at our worst, but identifying it as us at our worst, if that makes sense, right? It's a very beginning to a complicated subject, but thank you for that. Thank you all for your attempt. One more? Did you want to do one more? I would love it. Fire away.
For all the artists who work with the Catholic Art Institute, going back to the question about ugliness and beauty and the crucifixion, I was just at the National Gallery today, and some of the most beautiful works of art were of the crucifixion. How do artists, or what are your thoughts on how do artists sort of veil or unveil the ugliness of sin and of suffering and of the difficult parts of our human existence with a sort of beauty that make it very attractive, such as the stage that we see surrounding us. In this very room, there's one of those beautiful paintings I've seen, but they're about the most painful experience anyone can ever go through.
Mm-hmm.
What are some of your thoughts on that?
Do you want me, you were asking the group, do you want me to respond? Okay. Well, we have one here in this station here, station 12. We have a crucifixion scene. The reality, again, is horrific, right? What is being pictured there is, at least in some sense, it's a horror. It's an act of torture, and we recognize that. But here's what's remarkable, again, about art. When the artist represences even a horrible reality that has great meaning in a new medium, we love it, right? What makes that palatable for us, it's in a different medium, right? If we were standing at the foot of the cross on that original Good Friday watching that, we'd be devastated. We would be in tears if we were a believer. Hopefully we would be. But we wouldn't stand in a posture of kind of remove and contemplation, But that is the wonder of art. When you bring the presence into a new medium, you're offering it for contemplation, right? So we can look at the crucifixion, gaze upon it sensibly and also for its meaning, all day long, right? That's the beginning of an answer. Wonderful questions. I really appreciate it. Thank you for coming out tonight. It was just a joy to be with you. Thank you very much.